Hey everyone, welcome to Locked In, the channel that brings the best college football intel to the modern fan. We appreciate all of you who've watched our channel and would love for you to become part of the channel by clicking the subscribe button. This will help us become more visible on YouTube and help us achieve our goal of raising football IQs everywhere through in-depth analysis in plain English. Thanks everyone. Stay locked in. Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Locked In. Today we're going to turn our focus to Alabama and all of the coaching turnover that's happened there in the past few days since Kalen DeBoer was named the new head coach. Just uh, barely more than 2 whole days after Nick Saban's retirement was announced. And what we're going to talk about tonight, it's probably going to be a quick talk, but we want to go through and look at a few of the coaching changes that are being made. Who stayed on the Alabama staff from the Saban administration, I guess we could say, and who is who's come in with Coach DeBoer, and we want to talk a little bit about what kind of impact we think that we might see, how this might shift the way that Alabama looks in the future, and what might remain the same. The first big change that I'll mention, and we'll talk about it at the top because this is clearly going to be a big difference, is that DeBoer is bringing with him Ryan Grubb as offensive coordinator, and they've been together for a long time, 12 years altogether, and he has had a great offense. Washington had the top yards per game as an offense in 2023, and according to Sports Illustrated, he was on Saban's radar when he looked to replace Bill O'Brien in 2022. And so, Chance, I think this is going to be obviously the first place that Alabama will begin to look quite different because I think that the DeBoer Grubb offense is going to be quite different from the Saban Tommy Rees offense. What do you think?
I think that that is true, and there's more that goes into that because Ryan Grubb is also the quarterbacks coach for Washington, or was, and now is for Alabama. So that means for all the Jalen Milroe haters out there, and I am one of them, you will see Jalen Milroe develop into a way better quarterback, like you saw Penix develop into a way better quarterback coming from Indiana. So I mean, there's a lot to be worried about there if you're not an Alabama fan. But if you are an Alabama fan, that's good looks right there. Because I mean, you have Jalen Milroe, who's known for running the ball, not really being able to make the good decisions, hesitant passing the ball, looks to run first. This will be a good way to help him develop into a way better passing quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with that. And here's the one that I'm most interested in, and it's the one that I'm most, I guess, disappointed in with the Isaiah Bond transfer to Texas. DeBoer's also bringing Jamarcus Washington with him, who was the wide receivers coach at Washington, and
I
he
think
is a
it's
person that
Jamarcus
I'm
Shepard.
highly Shepard, excuse me. I am super interested in this guy because he has shown an ability to develop wide receivers like very few people I have ever encountered. And I think that all of a sudden, Alabama's receiver room gets a whole lot better just by him showing up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that helps a lot, and he's also their passing game coordinator, so he plays a lot with the offensive coordinator that they're also bringing over. So there's a big connection right there, and he does develop wide receivers great. If you want to go more in depth to that, because we'll see why Ryan Williams decommitted the 5-star that they was getting, and Isaiah Bond, we'll see why they can prove them wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really interests me with Shepard's work there at Washington is a lot's been said about these the big name wide receivers, but the thing that I think that until I started looking more at the numbers as we were looking at those semifinal games, what really stood out was how much that really good players got even better under his watch. For example, in 2022, and now we all know. I mean, that Washington had a great year in 2022, so it's not like this just all of a sudden happened. But if we look at Roma Dunze's numbers, he had 75 receptions for 1145 yards, 15.3 average, and 7 touchdowns. That was 2022. Okay, so Flip forward to 2023. Same guy, 92 receptions, 1,640 yards, almost a 500-yard bump, nearly an 18-yard average, 3 yards basically per catch, 13 touchdowns. That is a major, major change. And now I know that the part of the next one, Jalen Polk, is I think part of that is a product of Jalen McMillan getting hurt because he was a big part of the offense. And we saw, he was really kind of an X factor in those playoff games. He showed up quite well for Washington. But if we go back and look at Polk's numbers, he had in 2022 41 receptions, 694 yards, nearly a 17-yard average, and 6 touchdowns. So if we look at how that changed to 2023, he had a more productive year. He had, he had 69 catches, 1,159 yards, so nearly doubles his yards production. Still up there around a 17-yard average, 17, 18, kind of in that good spot, 16-8 this year, so it's a little shorter. 9 touchdowns. That guy grew. Now, I understand that those who would disagree with me will say McMillan's absence meant that Polk got targeted a lot more than he did the previous year, and I understand that, and that does make a lot of sense. Nevertheless, I think whenever you see those numbers for both of those, top guys, whenever you see their performance on the field, I mean, the way that they catch balls, I mean, the things that we pointed out in a lot of the previous videos, uh, they're going to be quite good with Shepard as their coach down at Alabama. I think he's going to build up some wide receivers. And the thing that I think is going to be vastly different, they're going to have a lot better talent on their roster. So imagine what they can do.
Yeah, I think Alabama has a good future there. And while you might think, well, Alabama's line didn't really hold up for Milroe this year. Well, guess what? Washington is bringing their line coach, Scott Huff, who had the line that won the Joe Moore Award this year, which is the
Right.
greatest offensive line in college football for the year. So you have a line coach that developed his line into the best offensive line in college football. You saw them against Michigan. They gave up very limited pressure and sacks. So I mean, it's looking good because they also have way worse talent than Alabama, and it's harder to recruit them linemen than it is in Alabama.
Yeah, and I think that the thing too. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you that I think that Michigan Washington game, a lot of that, was laid on the defensive line's ability to uh, maybe not sack Penix uh, several times, but they affected him so heavily. So I mean, it's Washington's offensive line had trouble with him. And one of the things that I think that I've seen some people just in comments, on the things that we put out, that they say that we tried to talk Washington up more than what we should have, but Michigan was an elite defense, and you're not going to see that complete of a front in college football for a while. It's pretty rare. Reminds me a lot of like a different version of what Georgia had a few years ago. So yeah, I mean they bullied these teams around and they got the job done. But when you look at what Alabama did, there were times when Alabama looked like they had not been coached. I mean, they didn't know how to fan block. They were tied up trying to to double team people, letting people run free. That is something that I will give Washington a lot of credit for. They might not have been able to hold them off from affecting Penix, but they never looked confused. Like they never looked like they didn't know what they were doing. There were plenty of times in that first half of the Rose Bowl that Alabama's offensive line simply did not know that it looked like they knew what they were doing, that they had no idea how to handle what Michigan was throwing at them. Now, is Michigan's defensive front good? Yeah, they are definitely elite. But I think Alabama had enough talent on that roster that if they were put in a position to do something, they probably could have. So I'm interested to see what this change with the O-line coach is going to bring for them. I think that's going to be positive ultimately.
Yeah, and they also get Nick Sheridan, the tight ends coach from Washington. He's coming along. So DeBoer is bringing basically his entire offensive staff, minus the new running backs coach, or actually, I guess the same running backs coach at Alabama, um,
Yeah.
and Robert Gillespie. But with that being said, I don't blame him. Running backs at Alabama, that's a phenomenal outlier that you've seen at Alabama for years. They always have great running backs. They always have developed running backs. So I mean, it's smart to keep him there since Alabama's running backs. You'd say it helps with the recruiting because
Yeah.
Washington had way worse running backs. Helps with the line because he's going to play hand in hand with that line. And then if you go over to the defensive side, they're also keeping the defensive line coach, Freddie Roach, and that'll help them tremendously. I know they're also keeping their scouting director from Alabama, Jarrett McElwain, and
McElwain.
Washington had like the 26th class last year or total talent, and this year they have the 29th ranked team according to 24/7. So if you look at that, you're saying, well, Washington went to the national championship and only has the 29th ranked class. So to keep them guys at Alabama, that's going to help them a lot with recruiting, and it also helped them get better talent, which they're always going to get. It's Alabama. Their 5 hour radius, 5 hour radius to town, I guess you'd say, is better than anybody else's in college football. If we're going to be honest, so I mean, Alabama always has a chance to be good if you get a good coach in there. So I think that they're going to be set on the defense if they could just get a few more pieces in there because they did lose their safeties coach. He went to Georgia to be their co-defensive coordinator. And then they also don't have a linebackers coach or a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. But I want to go back kind of what you were saying with Gillespie and Gillespie. What was I forget the Freddie Roach and Jarrett McElwain. I think that one of the things whenever a hire like Kalen DeBoer to Alabama takes place, the first thing that you think of is or the first thing you have if you're an Alabama guy is it's a knee jerk reaction because you are bringing somebody in from the West Coast. I mean, I've already heard the arguments against him. It's like, oh, he's a West Coast guy. Oh, well, he built off of Chris Peterson's recruits. I mean, you get all this stuff. I don't believe any of that for a minute. Now, did it help that, maybe some of Peterson's people still in the building? Sure, it did. But he really built that Washington team up. And I mean, this guy has been brilliant at every level. So, I mean, you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's going to do well. And here's what I was really impressed with those three names are key to recruiting in Alabama. And I think that they all have, they have a track record in Alabama. McElwain goes all the way back. His dad was an offensive coordinator there, a few years ago. They're known entities. And so I think that whenever you have that, that's going to establish some continuity that's really going to help DeBoer, I think, not lose too many recruiting battles. Now, obviously, he's going to lose some because he's the new man in town. He's replacing, the person who's quite likely the greatest college football coach to ever do it. So there are going to be things that will slow him down, but I think that when you look at those at those guys at those key positions, I mean, for instance, Michigan just showed you what happens whenever you have an elite defensive line. Georgia Bulldogs have showed us what happens whenever you have have an elite defensive line, and if you can keep continuity of that position and a stream of players coming in to play for you, I think that that's really great. And Alabama is known for their backs, and so the thing that I would not want anybody to say that like we're trying to knock Washington's running backs, but just by saying that they're not as good as Alabama's, but they're not as good. You're getting access to a completely different kind of running back whenever you come to Alabama. And, and honestly, just the in-state recruiting is going to be unbelievable. It's going to be so far beyond anything that DeBoer has had. And that's no offense to anybody. It simply is. He's going to have access to Alabama and he's going to have greater access to the South. Two things he would have never had in the Pacific Northwest. For all he built up and for all he had, you can't compete with that. And so I think that he, in keeping those three guys on staff at Alabama, I think that he likes what they've done with the players at those position groups. And I think he also knows that he needs some local faces to help keep recruiting good players into Alabama. And if he has a boosted, talent base, there's no telling what this guy could do. Now, like you said, jury's out on that defensive coordinator position. it'll be interesting to see what he does. And I guarantee you right now, the question, if you go with what we're saying and you give him the benefit of the doubt, I think that if you're an Alabama person, where the doubt gets pretty thick is on the defensive side. And so if he makes a strong hire at DC, I'll tell you, I'm interested to see what next year looks like for Alabama. I really am. And right now, I mean, have you heard of any names being floated for that
I
defensive that coordinator position?
I haven't heard of any as of now. I mean, I could expect them to go after someone like Glenn Schumann, someone established as a defensive coordinator. I just don't know who they would get at this point. I mean, Arizona's head coach went to coach for Washington after DeBoer left. So there's that. But I'm not seeing much at all about who they can get.
So with that being said, is there anything else to be for us to discuss on this on the issue of the coaching turnover at Alabama right now, or we pretty much covered the bases?
Um, I mean, pretty much it's mainly just going to be what players can they retain and who else can they bring in to help that defense that was so shaky for Washington last year, at least in the box.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the things that you got to be worried about whenever you're thinking about what this is going to look like going forward. It's definitely going to be different. Um, and I'm by no means an Alabama fan. I respect what Saban did. I'm in the position where I'll pull for them if they're not playing one of my teams. I've always liked Saban. From Michigan State on, he's always been one who's impressed me. But I'll tell you, I'm honestly excited to see what happens with Alabama. In the next few years, I think Kalen DeBoer is about as good as it gets, and I think he could. They if it all works right, I think they could be. They could be in store for another long tenured coach. Do you not think so?
Yeah, I agree. They just got to win this year. Say, give
Yeah.
some. If as long as they get into playoffs, it'll be fine because the playoffs are now 12-team playoffs. You could probably lose 3 games, still get into playoffs, make a push. You're going to be more talented than mainly any other roster out there. So Alabama should be fine in the future, and I think that DeBoer will bring in probably one of the highest powered offenses you'll ever see in the coming years of college football.
I think he's got an opportunity to, and I like the fact that even though it's not kind of like the grinded out um, game that we expect to see in the SEC sometimes, I'll also say not everything is like those, bloodbaths with LSU and Alabama that were so low scoring, back about 2010, 2011. The SEC, they've spread their offenses out quite a bit, so I don't think that DeBoer is going to be a shock. But what I'm interested to see is how he turns that really just spread out passing game into a ball control device. I mean, it's interesting to see what Washington does, or what Washington has done, we'll say. And I'm interested to see how that plays out in Tuscaloosa. I think you're right. This is a Tuscaloosa. It's a place where you better win. There's some expectations coming in, and it's not, it's not for second place. But at the same time, I don't think DeBoer is going to be bothered by that. I think he knows exactly what he's getting himself into, and I'm excited to see it all, unfold. So, with that being said, we appreciate you tuning in to us. Please subscribe. Help us out. We've really seen an increase in people visiting the channel, and we really appreciate it. We're happy to talk ball with you. We're happy to to field questions and comments and everything else. So just keep tuning in, and even more than that on the college football front, stay locked in, everybody. Thank you.